Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. I am Paul Sisler, and I am the host of In the Moment. Today, episode number 1, Who Wrote the Bill? We are going to take a dive into our Congress and the legislation that they vote upon, that they present, that they pass. We're going to break it down. We're going to show how the left and the right are one of the same. The idea behind this is to educate people on how our process works. If you notice in the opening, I gave how a bill becomes a law. So we'll take a look at that. And the bill that we're going to look at today, we'll decide on who wrote it, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican. And then we're going to see if it is a partisan or bipartisan sponsorship and co-sponsorship. And then after that, we are going to tear into the bill. We're going to break it down and decide if it's a good bill or not. And with us today, our two hosts are Jack Cunningham and Nick Nunley. Jack, Nick, hello. How are you guys doing today?
Doing really well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, excited to be here, man.
All right. So if you guys could, I would like you to tell me a little bit about yourselves, tell the audience a little bit about yourselves, the parties. If you've been affiliated with different parties, kind of explain that and who you're affiliated with now and what you're doing in relation to that. And let's start with Jack.
Sure. Well, my name is Jack. I am a proud member of the Democratic Party. I appreciate the steps that we use to better the quality of living for all people, especially those in the bottom percentages. I really think that we need to continue prioritizing everyone, especially those who are in the lower socioeconomic level. And I'm just really proud of the work that we are doing so far, and I just can't wait to see that work continue, especially as time goes on and we are tackling these challenges head on.
Excellent. Nick.
All right. Well, I am a volunteer with the Forward Party in California. Proud member of the party. I started volunteering in January of this year, and I've just been off to the races ever since. I really think that we need more competition in politics, and I really like what they stand for. You know, Andrew Yang really inspired me with his 2016 candidacy and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just happy to be here. Before the Forward Party, I was actually volunteering and working for the Republican Party. It was a small county GOP coalition to get a congressperson elected, and it was actually in opposition to the RNC candidate. So it was kind of its own grassroots thing within the GOP movement. I'm glad to have learned from that, but I'm really glad to be at the Forward Party where, I can really put my all into things like UBI and stuff that's beyond the right-left paradigm.
Excellent. Now, Jack, have you always been a Democrat?
Honestly, growing up, I was in a moderate Republican household. After the 2016 election, though, and seeing from my perspective, the disaster that was Donald Trump's presidency, I really had to do everything I could to stand up for what I believe was right. And so after that election and after the first few months of Donald Trump's presidency, I decided to get involved. I've been involved with many campaigns, and now I'm a campaign manager, and I'm really proud to say that I've helped candidates who are really exceptional people. And I really appreciate their quality for care and attention to the people in my region, especially those who have experienced a lot of hurt. And so I'm very happy to spread their message out and make sure that we continue to stand for what is right and what is morally acceptable.
Excellent. And Nick, you said you were once a Republican, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I was.
I used to be a Democrat, and I am now an independent. So I want people to make note of the variety that we have here and how we're all going to be getting along and how we can actually have conversation and debate. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to do is bring people together. Now, with that said, we also have a guest today on our first show. We have Sandy Sands. Hello, Sandy. How are you today?
Hello, I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. And like Jack and Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and your prior party affiliations, if you had any, and who you're affiliated with now.
All right, just a little background. I'm an engineer by education and training. A number of years ago, I went into real estate development. Now, besides that, I'm spending my time on politics, which I'll get into. So I became a independent in the Ross Perot days. So I've been independent for many years now, but I came to the conclusion that, well, I see the same problems that everybody else has seen, the decline in our politics and being able to get things done and address people. And I personally came to the conclusion that the Republican and the Democratic Party were not going to solve our problems. They were too tied to their money interests and other pressures. And so I went looking for a third party. I volunteered for the Forward Party. I volunteered for the Common Sense Party here in California. The two are now very closely aligned. They're affiliated, and I'm working hard, probably putting much more time into that endeavor than any of my own business endeavors. So that's where I'm coming from.
All right. All right. And again, I want to point out the diversity that we have on this panel and the thought processes and how a lot of us and all that, we're going to be coming from things from a different perspective. And remember, let's always keep it friendly. This is something that we're all going to look at, and we're going to try to explain why we see things a certain way and try to give people an understanding of where we come from and why in our opinions. Now, this first bill, what I've noticed with this Congress is that they're very, very slow on summaries. When we get into this and all that, towards the end, I'm going to break down congress.gov and how you can go through and look up the bills and stuff like that. But usually within a few weeks to a month, almost every bill that's introduced has a summary to it. And I am finding bills all the way back from the beginning that don't have a summary. So my pickings is very slim, so I decided to hell with it. If I don't have a summary, I don't have a summary. This bill today, we don't have a summary. So we're just going to go right into the text of the bill. And again, I'm not going to reveal the name of the bill yet or the number of it because I don't want people to get a jump start and throw in the comments who wrote it.
Shoot. That would have been great.
People to figure out who wrote it. So we're going to start out with this one right here. Let's see. Maybe I'll go to. Let's see. There we go. Okay. In this act, number 1, federal recreational lands and waters. The term federal recreational lands and waters has meaning given the term in Section 802 of the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, United States Code 16, Section 6801. Gateway community. The term gateway community means a community that serves as a entry point or is adjacent to a recreation destination on federal recreational lands and waters or non-federal land at which there is a consistently high in the determination of the secretary's seasonal or year-round visitation. Indian tribe. The term Indian tribe has the meaning given the term in Section 4 of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act under United States Code 25-5304. Secretaries, it gives the terms of secretaries, which we're dealing with the chief of the Secretary of Agriculture under the chief of Forest Service, and the other secretary is Secretary of Interior. Now, based on the definitions, Jack, do you think this is a Democratic-sponsored bill or a Republican-sponsored bill?
If we're just going by definitions, so far I think that this is a Democratic bill.
Nick, Democratic or Republican?
Yeah, I'm going to go Democrat.
Okay. Sandy, Democrat or Republican?
Yeah, the issues brought up are addressed more often by Democrats, so I'll go Democrat also.
Okay. All right, we're going into Section 3, Gateway Communities. A, assessment of impacts and needs in gateway communities using existing funds available to the secretaries. The secretaries, 1, shall collaborate with state and local governments, Indian tribes, housing authorities, applicable trade associations, nonprofit organizations, and other relevant stakeholders to identify needs and economic impacts in gateway communities, including A, housing shortages, B, demands on existing municipal infrastructure, C, accommodation of management and sustainable visitation, and D, the expansion and diversification of visitor experiences by bolstering the visitation at 1, underutilized locations on nearby federal recreational lands and waters that are suitable for developing, expanding, or enhancing recreational use as identified by the secretaries, or 2, lesser known recreation sites as identified under Section 5B1B on nearby land managed by a state agency or a local agency. Number 2, may address a need identified under paragraph 1 by A, providing financial or technical assistance to a gateway community under an existing program. B, entering into a lease, right-of-way, or easement in accordance with applicable laws. Or C, issuing an entity referred to in paragraph 1 a special use permit other than a special recreational pit permit in accordance with applicable laws. B, technical and finance assistance to businesses. I'll get into that in a second. Jack, are you still with Democrat?
I'm still with Democrat.
Nick, still with Democrat?
Yeah, if I understand the bill correctly.
Sandy, still with Democrat?
Yes.
Okay. B, technical and financial assistance to businesses. Number 1, in general, the Secretary of Agriculture, acting through the administration of the Rural Business Cooperative Service, in coordination with the Secretary and the Secretary of Commerce, shall provide to businesses in gateway communities the assistance described in paragraph 2 to establish, operate, or expand infrastructure to accommodate and manage sustainable visitation, including hotels, campgrounds, and restaurants. Number 2, assistance. The Secretary of Agriculture may provide assistance under paragraph 1 through the use of existing or the establishment of new entrepreneur and vocational training programs, technical assistance programs, low-interest business loan programs, and loan guarantee programs. C, partnerships. In carrying out this section, the secretaries may, in accordance with applicable laws, enter into public-private partnership, cooperative agreement, memorandum of understanding, or similar agreement with a gateway community or a business in a gateway community. Jack, still Democrat?
Still Democrat.
Nick, still Democrat?
Mm-hmm.
Sandy, still Democrat?
Yes.
Okay. Public meetings before a reduction of access to national parks. Before taking any action that will reduce access to a national park, not including actions to reduce access due to incidents, specific events that present a risk to health and safety, such as weather event or vehicle accident, the superintendent of the affected national park shall conduct public meetings, consult local stakeholders, and provide an opportunity for submission of public comments for a period of not less than 60 days. In the comments, I see Alexander Korn is saying Republican. I'm not seeing anybody else say anything. He also said, I bet it's an independent. So I'm going to put that out there. In fact, he said, I bet it's an independent. Then he said Republican. Okay. Improve recreational visitation data, annual visitation data. The secretary shall establish a single visitation data reporting system to report accurate annual visitation data in a consistent manner. Each unit of federal recreational lands and waters, B, land held in trust for an Indian tribe on request of the Indian tribe. 2, categories of use within the visitation data reporting system established under paragraph. The secretary shall A, establish multiple categories of different recreational activities. B, provide an estimate of the number of visitors for each applicable category established under paragraph A. Then we go to real-time data pilot program. I'm starting to go through this a little bit faster. I want to get out some of the relevant information in relation to this. Not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this act, using existing funds available to the secretaries, the secretary shall carry out a pilot program to be known as the Real-Time Data Pilot Program, referred to in this section as the pilot program, to make available to the public for each unit of federal recreational lands and waters selected for participation in the pilot program under paragraph 2. A, real-time or predictive data on visitation, including data and resources publicly available from existing non-governmental platform. 1, the unit federal recreational lands and waters. 2, the extent practicable areas within the unit of federal recreational lands and waters. And 3, to the extent practicable, I don't know why I'm having troubles with that word today, recreational sites managed by any other federal agency, a state agency, or a local agency that are located near the unit of federal recreational lands and waters. Are you still with Democrats, Jack?
Yes.
Nick?
From what I understand about the bill, this is the government wants to spend money at these locations and for a portfolio of reasons, and that seems like a big spending Democrat thing to do. But I don't know.
Sandy?
Right?
Yeah, just to put a bigger perspective in there. Yeah, the general feel of the bill is Democrat. The place where it could be from a Republican is if there's a Republican district that has an Indian reservation or similar in it, he could be pushing for money in his district. So that's the scenario I could see it being a Republican bill.
Okay.
Smells like
Locations. Okay. Locations. Initial number of units. On establishment of the pilot program, the Secretary shall select for participation in the pilot program. 1, 15 units of federal recreational lands and waters managed by the Secretary. 2, 5 units of federal recreational lands and waters managed by the Secretary of Agriculture. Expansion. Not later than 5 years after the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary shall expand the pilot program by selecting 80 additional units of federal recreational lands and waters managed by the Secretaries for participation in the pilot program, not fewer than 50 of which shall be units managed by the Secretary. C, feedback, support of gateway communities. The Secretary shall solicit feedback regarding participation in the pilot program from communities adjacent to units of federal recreational lands and waters and the public. 2, in carrying out subparagraphs A and B, select a unit of federal recreation lands and waters to participate in the pilot program only if the community adjacent to the unit of federal recreation lands and waters is supportive of the participation of the unit of federal recreational lands and waters in the pilot program. Now, I want you to know this is what I do. This is basically what I do. I read bills and I break them down. And I'm sure you can see, my God, Paul, this is just getting so boring. Jesus Christ. It sounds so repetitive. You have to understand a lot of this language that is put in there, it has a purpose. It has a purpose. And this is where we start to see how the left and the right are one and the same. I'll get to that in a moment. Dissemination of information. The secretaries may disseminate the information described in paragraph 1 directly or through an entity or organization referred to in subsection C. Community partners and third-party providers. For purposes of carrying out this section, the secretary concerned may coordinate and partner with communities adjacent to units of federal recreational lands and waters, state and local outdoor recreation and tourism offices, local governments, Indian tribes, trade associations, local outdoor recreation marketing organizations, permitted facilitated recreation providers, or other relevant stakeholders. Other relevant stakeholders. Other relevant stakeholders.
Purposely ambiguous.
Coordinate or enter into agreements as appropriate with private sector and nonprofit partners, including technology companies, geospatial data companies, experts in data science, analytics, and operations research, or data companies. Nick, Still
Mhm.
Democrat.
This sounds like like just a big government move. The federal funds are flowing, and all of the establishment politicians need to take advantage of them. And I mean it, and I guess there's some sort of sweet deal for big data as well. I don't, there's a lot of parts here.
Jack?
For me, I see this as something that a Democrat or a few Democrats or many Democrats created, and also possibly being co-sponsored with a few Republicans. The way I see that is because when we look into tribal lands and whatnot, those are predominantly out in Western states, and typically speaking, on a state level, those are dominated by the Republican parties. And when we're talking about developing hotels in conjunction with tourist areas and whatnot, that would, to your point, Nick, tell me that like some people want to bring some of those funds to their area to see tourism and boost their own local economies. And in so doing, I think that all of this seems appropriate, especially when considering how these are moves that are made with the approval of the supporting adjoining neighborhoods and communities, as well as the stakeholders. So it's not like the federal government is going in and saying, hey, you're going to take this and you're going to like it. They're working in a more collaborative approach. And so I think that this is a means of providing much needed attention to some of the key critical components that could be seen from the natural features in the area. If you're focusing on tourism, there's got to be a reason why you want people to go and tour the area. And so if you're investing with that and your hotels and infrastructure supporting that, I think that this is a mixture of the Democrats creating this bill as well as being co-sponsored by a few Republicans.
Okay, Sandy.
I think you have highlighted a very interesting part that is not consistent with the rest of the bill, where you're talking about geospatial tech companies and geospatial data companies and these other stakeholders. It's sort of like this came from left field, not political left, just the colloquial left. The maybe it's not a red flag, but it's a yellow flag. You want to, it just doesn't seem appropriate. So it opens the possibility that this whole thing is a front for something that some tech interest wants. You got to let's dig farther.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a fan of, there can be a confluence of events. It can be many things at once. And I think that's how these things happen, is a bunch of interests get involved. I think that, like Jack said, I mean, not everything is just wasteful government spending. Of course, it's a wonderful cause to, try and encourage tourism and business and an economy in your town, and especially on tribal lands and all that stuff. So that's great. But a lot of these, again, there's a little bit of yellow flags. I mean, I wonder if this has to do with cooperating, making some legal caveats so they can cooperate with tech companies regarding tourism. I don't know, but it does seem out of left field. That's for sure.
Okay. And one of our commenters says Republicans are big government advocates. So we're almost done here with this bill. Let's see. Existing programs. The secretaries may use existing programs or products of the secretaries to carry out this section. Privacy clauses. Nothing in this section provides authority to the secretaries, one, to monitor or record the movements of a visitor to a unit of federal recreational lands and waters. Two, to restrict, interfere with, or monitor a private communication of a visitor to a unit of federal recreational lands or waters, or to collect information from owners of land adjacent to a unit of federal recreational lands and waters, information from owners of land adjacent to a unit of federal recreational lands and waters, or information on non-federal land. Reggie T just popped in. I think a Republican wrote it. F, reports not later than January 1st, 2024, and annually thereafter, the secretaries shall publish on the website of the secretaries a report that describes the annual visitation of each unit of federal recreational lands and waters, including to the maximum extent practicable visitation categorized by recreational activity. And then the last section of this is establishment of digital version of America the Beautiful, the national parks and the federal recreational land passes. Section 805A of the Federal Lands Recreational Enhancement Act, United States Code 166804, is amended by adding to at the end of the following: 10 digital recreational passes by not later than January 1st, 2024. The Secretary shall establish a digital version of the National Parks and Federal Recreational Lands Pass that is able to be stored on a mobile device, and B, on the completion of a sale of a National Parks and Federal Recreational Lands Pass carried out under paragraph 6A, make available to the pass holder the digital version of the National Parks and Federal Recreational Lands Pass established under subparagraph A. So, final thoughts. Let's start with our guest, Sandy. Final thoughts.
Well, yeah, to give the summary of this right from the very beginning, my first question is, what's the need? Why are we doing this? Why are we spending federal money? If, starting with the first half of the bill, obviously it's migrated into some other subjects, but just, development of recreation. What's stopping the development now? Do we need to just back off on some rules that allows the private market to do it? Is there just not enough capital? Could we give low interest loans rather than paying for it directly? Then you have other stakeholders with, money in the game, a stake in the game. So, this whole maybe there is a big background and a reason that the federal government needs to step in and do this development. But, the bill certainly doesn't cover that. I certainly don't have that information. Going on to the last half of the bill, the tech, as I mentioned, seemed to be stuck on there, and that it ends with this pass holder. Again, a pass holder is that deserves to be its own bill with its own subject. And there's a lot of issues to having a pass holder, a lot of technical issues. It covered some of them here, but tack it on to the end of this bill, was the first bill on the floor, and the way to expedite a pass holder bill was to tack it on. I don't know. It certainly seems out of place unless you switch gears and say, now we need a pass holder. And I don't know the technicalities behind what makes a good pass holder bill and all the technology, but certainly seemed from left field here, and it deserves more thought and attention.
Okay, so final thought on the aspect of, is it a Democrat or a Republican who sponsored it? And do you think it's either partisan or bipartisan sponsorship?
Still lean Democrat, bipartisan sponsorship.
Okay.
It's possible to have bipartisan sponsorship. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other.
Okay. All right, Jack, let's go with you.
Sure. My thoughts on this is that it provides a means for modernizing some of that infrastructure that's currently existing to make sure that some of these features that the federal government can do with the Federal Lands Enhancement Act, to modernize it similar to what a private organization might do with the creation of their own digital passes. Maybe since having and seeing the digital passes in the private sector be really beneficial to the consumer, the federal government is suggesting that this is very beneficial here as well, especially noting the pilot program above and seeing if that's going to be beneficial, especially with the protection of privacy and whatnot. This is telling me that it's collecting aggregate data about what's beneficial. Is this park going to be better used than a different park? Are things, and just providing that data, it's very great to see if anything needs to be expanded or possibly decommissioned in a few years based on the usage of the new tourists coming in. I would say that if I am a private business owner and I'm looking at my own tourism areas, my hotel chain and whatnot, do I take the risk of developing in a new area for tourism, or do I stay in the area I already have and possibly make my own improvements here, because that is seems to be financially supported based on what I have already. And more times than not, I would assume if I am that private organization, that if I invested into the area I already am in and I'm doing well, I want to continue that. I don't want to take the risk of investing hypothetically thousands or maybe millions of dollars in a new area. And so by having the federal government come in and suggest, hey, make this happen in this area and see what happens, I think that that's a good way to look at investing in areas that possibly haven't been invested in as much before. And as far as like seeing if this is how something that is going to be Democrat or Republican, I'm still believing that the Democrats made most, if not all, of this bill. Maybe a few Republicans joined in on this too, but I do think that this is going to be co-sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans because of the very nature that it supports privacy rights, which I'm hugely in favor of. It supports modernizing some of this infrastructure and providing new resources to go into areas that have not had a lot of investment before, possibly, and making sure that tourism is enhanced in these tribal areas or more park services. I think that that is something that is both Democrat and Republican co-sponsored.
Okay. Nick.
All right. Yeah, I think that this is probably a bipartisan bill. Though I love the intention here, Jack, I will say I think it is a travesty that it takes an act of Congress to get digital technology into the national parks workforce. I wish that maybe they had the capacity to make those kind of decisions without, again, these Congress people barely have time to pay attention as is. I don't see why I had to take a whole act of Congress. I guess if we're apportioning money to, I guess we're doing more than just the digital recreation passes here. I guess we're probably doing some infrastructure and on these gateway communities, which would be great. But again, I mean, I think that there's a very valid criticism that there should be that this should not be a process of government, that this should be a process of market allocation, and whatever the reason is that it wasn't. That either if maybe the park is not getting enough business to stay open, of course we need to subsidize our national parks, but it's incumbent upon them as well to change what they do. And probably if they were able to make the decision to have this digital pass thing, maybe they would be getting much more tourism in the beginning, but because they have to defer to Congress and wait for the funds, it doesn't lead to any sort of pace of action. So again, I don't think this should have to go through Congress at all. I would like the parks to be able to make these kind of meek decisions on their own. And who knows? I mean, it says that the Secretary of State's not allowed to collect your data, so the government's not allowed to collect your data. But all of the third-party contractors involved, it says nothing about how the third-party contractors. It says that they have access to your data. So though it's not they're not in the public sphere, it still is going to go out through the private data brokerage sphere, and that's this one and the same. It's public as is, whether it goes to the Secretary of State or to Google.
All right. So, final thoughts. Red flag, yellow flag, green flag. Green flag meaning it's a great bill, I want to see it pass. Red flag means, oh, hell no. Yellow flag says, I need to be cautious and dig into this more. Sandy? Red, yellow, or green?
I have to say, I'm red. To kind of back up Nick's comments, why is this a federal program? We always complain about all the red tape and how hard it is whenever anything goes through the federal. I'm going like maybe we need a bill that releases responsibility, lets people farther down the road, whether it be the marketplace, whether it be the park service, that sort of thing. I don't think this is a good bill. I mean, it it talks about some motherhood and apple pie things like, enhancing our parks and stuff like that. But no, I don't. I think that's kind of the trap we've gotten into in government. This should not be at the federal level. That if anything, the bill should be policies and rules that allow other people to execute these things. Maybe with some restrictions on data sharing, because as Nick pointed out, just because the government doesn't collect it doesn't mean it's not a problem. The marketplace is as much a problem as the government, if not more, because it's unaccountable. So yeah, no, I'm down on this bill.
Okay, Jack, red, yellow, or green?
I myself am green.
Green.
And I say that because this continues to invest into our great public service of recreation and provides metrics for both the public and private sectors to get involved with how they approve and how they see things going. And it also protects the interest and saying of people who don't want to get involved or say, hell no. This law respects that. There was a clear provision in that earlier that says they must agree to this for these things to kick in around their area. As far as the data goes, this collects, based on what I have seen, only aggregate data and not about the individual person and group who is going to go to this, as well as the people who are living right next to it, and information on non-federal land, which I think is great to have those protections. If they didn't have those protections, I would be a red flag. And I say that it's great because of these protections, because if you go to a private company and you spend money at a private company, whether that be something like CVS or going to shop for clothing, food, whatever, those companies have your data on file saying that you shop there. And because of that, they already are collecting aggregate data on you just from the private sector.
Right.
And I'm not sure whether I personally trust the private sector more than the federal government on my data. In fact, I think I don't want either both to have my data, but if the private sector already has a lot of my data and doing whatever with it, then that's that. And another thing too about the modernization of these passes and how, to your point, Sandy, that you don't think this is something that should be done federally and should be done locally. If you are part of a chain that is a national or international conglomerate, you are forbidden from changing policies to your small company, if that's in, say, Austin, Texas, or in California, or in New York, because of the very nature of the structure of that organization. There is a top-down format from those private companies who are saying that you have to follow our company procedure. And so you can't just, for example, go in McDonald's and change things because McDonald's has a policy that says that, this is what our international company is doing. And so as such, I don't see like there's an issue there when compared to here. And I'm making this comparison. I never said anyone made this comparison, but in making that comparison too, we as a national country have a means of saying, okay, yes, we have this structured format. Do I as a person want some of these decisions to be made there? Yes. And I would hope that there might possibly be another act going forward that would say, hey, based on some of the regional scope of these national parks, feel free to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that your part of the park system is beneficial. But it does take some of this on a generalized level to start the process of saying, hey, this digital recreation pass is good for this area, as well as this area, as well as this area, as well as this area. Because one digital recreation pass, say in Oklahoma or Nevada, is not applicable to a digital recreation pass that could be passed in North Dakota or California or Oregon. And so for that and all of these reasons, I am a green flag or green card saying that this is a good bill.
Green flag. Nick,
Green
red,
flag.
yellow, or green?
All right, big yellow. I cannot say green, though I appreciate Jack's points. I think that I would be more impressed. There are some data privacy rights in here, and I do want to commend the government for being cognizant of that when they're writing their bill. I'm glad it's finally showing nowadays. to Sandy's point is that there is no caveat in here that this situation will be resolved going forward. It is, and this is, to me, it seems like an executive's situation. It doesn't seem like a legislative situation. And so I know that Congress has to vote to pass budget items and stuff like that, but I don't see why this isn't I don't see why this isn't somebody else's singular responsibility. Department of IT for the national park system. I don't know why they can't just make that decision themselves and then request funds. I get that there's a little bit more going on to it as far as infrastructure, right, Paul? There's some other kind of
Yes, and we're going to get into that a little bit more after I do the big reveal here.
Okay. So then I'll just finish up here. Yeah, big red flags for me is that it doesn't show a sustainable process. Congress has so much to deal with, and we can't every time the national parks need to pivot, they can't rely on an act of freaking Congress. They call it an act of Congress because it's so difficult to do, and it requires hundreds of people's times. It requires hundreds of representatives, I think, to vote on it. Or I guess maybe per committee, just a few, but it requires all of their staff. It requires a lot of, it's expensive. And so we can't solve every problem with an act of Congress. We need to set up like a sustainable, way to go forward. And I'm going to land it there. Let's
red, yellow, or green?
Yellow, big yellow.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a red, a yellow, and a green. We have everybody believing that it's red, and I believe everybody agreed that it's more than likely bipartisan. So everybody thinks the Democrats wrote this. The big reveal is it was written by Republican in Montana, Ryan Zinke. It's a Republican bill.
Wow.
Trying to get in good with his tribal neighbors, just tribal lands neighbors there.
It's HR 3200. It's called the Gateway Community and Recreation Enhancement Act. Okay.
Wow.
So why is it this guy incumbent on him to push this through for the national park system? Like, why? I think that there's a conflict of interest. He's not interested in the digital pass for the park. I'm sure he's interested in other things.
Can I ask you, Nick, then what do you think his vested interest in this is getting this done? If it's not for improving our park system or modernizing how our park system is going, what do you think is his perspective on getting this done?
Yeah, I don't know, but that is kind of my gut reaction. I'm supremely suspicious about politicians and their reasonings. I know why they do some of the things that they do, and it's totally within it's not like a stretch of the imagination to think that they would put a couple of clauses in there that's like, mom and apple pie, everyone, no one would disagree with. But the true nature of the bill maybe lies somewhere else. I don't know.
Okay.
Wow, it seems like
if I can address that one, no, it brings money into his district. He probably has some projects he's targeted.
So it's not like it's not a good cause, the digital passes, but his interest is wholly selfish, and he would take as much of those federal funds as he could, whether it was justified or not.
Although that is the way all of our politics work. Everybody's out there promoting for themselves.
Right.
Mary Peltola, Democrat, Arkansas, only Democrat that co-sponsored. We have John Curtis, Republican, Utah, Doug LaMalfa, Republican, California, Dan Newhouse, Republican, Washington, Pete Stauber, Republican, Minnesota, Maria Salazar, Republican, Florida, Michael Lawler, Republican, New York, and Burgess Owens, Republican, Utah.
I gotta say, I'm surprised by that co-sponsorship. I would have thought that based on how I interpreted that some more Democrats would have gotten behind it. But I mean, hey, it's actually pleasantly surprising to see that there are Republicans out there who do want to improve our park system and make it more modernized and while maintaining the privacy rights. I think that that's great, wonderful.
So why now? Why now? How long do you think that the people at the National Park Service have been complaining and asking for a digital service? I'm sure for the last 8 years they've been asking for this. So is it to commend them that it's happening now, or is it actually more of kind of an egg on the face?
Well, I'll get into that. It's gone through 3 committees: House National Resources, House Agricultural, and House Agricultural Subcommittee on Forestry. There are no amendments to it. So let me go back to the text, because one of the important things that I wanted to bring up here, I can take this out for right now. I want you to really think about private businesses and adjacent to the federal lands. This is where I have a problem, because now let's say you are you go into a reservation, which is again you have federal lands next to a reservation. You want to build up something and all that, and you're wanting to add to both communities. And now you have businesses like Tesla coming in and building a plant adjacent to this. It now has all of these privacies. It doesn't have to share its information.
Oh.
Well, now we're talking about taxes, not collecting taxes, not paying taxes. Now we start getting into more of the helping the big corporations come in and get tax breaks. And yes, are they creating jobs? Yes, they're going to create jobs, and that's going to be their big thing. Yes, we created jobs, but we're also giving these big corporations big tax breaks. And this is what this is going to come into. This is about bringing business onto federal lands and next to federal reserves. And again, we have the data. I pointed out, I wanted to go back to that. Let me.
I thought that was just the function of the technology for the data for the digital pass. I thought that was that addressing. You want to show us where you picked up that handout for big business you're talking about?
Okay.
Okay.
Coordinate and partner with communities adjacent to units of federal recreational lands and waters, state and local outdoor recreation and tourism offices, local governments, Indian tribes, trade associations, local outdoor recreation marketing organizations, permitted facilitated recreational providers, other relevant
So that would make sense.
stakeholders.
Wow.
Coordinate or enter into agreements as appropriate with private sector and nonprofit partners, including technology companies, geospatial data companies, experts in data science, analytics, and operations research, and data companies. This is about making money off of people and their information while giving big corporations tax breaks, partnering up with other corporations, and again, screwing the people like us over.
I will say, Dollar Store it's a big corporation. It goes into lots of communities. It's one of the most popular stores. Has literally a negative job ad to the community. It literally takes away jobs with its very presence, and it sucks all of the profit out of so many communities. And so, yeah, I think that they're obviously not showing any sort of nuance in that field. I think they're just leaving it open so that they can do their deals with the biggest companies in America. They love to work with them.
Yes. And the adjacent companies is what really irks me, is because even if they're not involved in this directly or on this land, all they have to do is be adjacent to it, and they're going to reap the benefits of it. And that, to me, is just again.
And maybe
no, Paul. I'm really glad that you pointed this out, because now I must change my flag from green to yellow, or I might even be red, because your interpretation of that was something that I haven't considered until mentioning that. And that leads me to even more concerns based on how that would also mean that there would be big companies and organizations who would buy up the land around that, just like you mentioned, for getting a lot of these funds, these tax breaks, incentives, which if I'm thinking like a big tech executive or whatnot, then I would say, I'm going to buy up as much land as I can from that and
Yes.
then reap the benefits from that. And as someone myself, I'm a huge proponent of small businesses and people starting up their own companies and organizations like that. And so I see this as a big hindrance to that. And I think that it's also harmful and only going to further exacerbate the ability for people in those areas to start their own companies or things like that. Now, granted, if those provisions were not in the bill and removed, then I would be back to being a green flag. But because of this and because of the huge opportunity for misuse, I am not in support of this measure.
Yes. Sandy, you were getting ready to say something. Go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, I wanted a little clarification. So we talk about big companies adjacent. They specifically mentioned tech companies and data type tech companies. And you gave the example of Tesla. Is this what I'll call a loophole big enough for any company to go in? I mean, that the tech companies seem to be tied to the past thing. You're pointing out it doesn't have to be. Obviously, I was weary of why there was a pass issue on this. I think you brought out an excellent point that, what are the constraints on the adjacent companies and what are the subsidies that these adjacent companies get,
Right.
tax-free. Could you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, Tesla's an AI company, my friend. It's not a car company. It's an AI company.
Okay, so that's why I use Tesla as an example.
Yes.
And then the bill would actually subsidize these tech companies that buy adjacent?
Yes, and give them tax breaks.
It could. It leaves the door open for federal funds to go into development of these adjacent lands.
Bingo.
So if you want to build a factory, and they'll say, oh, it's going to create jobs for the reservation or whatever that is getting built next to, but really underneath it, it's just more, I don't know, it feels like just big business buying more land, and getting a easier shake of things, honestly. Like if it was just for small businesses, which are, by the way, the hugest job multiplier and economic force in America are small businesses, for a lot of people, and I think that would be a much more beneficial economy to be adjacent next to a reservation, a community of small businesses versus some giant.
Right. And I want to add one more thing to this. I want you guys to understand this. When I did the beginning, federal recreational lands and waters, the term federal recreational lands and waters has the meaning given in the term section 802 of the federal. Okay. Let's go to that. Okay. Standard amenity recreation fee. The term standard amenity recreation fee means the recreation fee authorized by section 6802F. The term expanded amenity recreation fee means the recreation fee authorized by section. The term entrance fee means the recreation fee authorized to be charged to enter onto lands managed by the National Park Services and the United States Fish and Wildlife Services, Federal Land Management Agency. When you start going into the United States Code of this, there are even more benefits that come with it. And there are more tax breaks. And then there are fees that these companies that go into can additionally charge. So now if you're buying their product, they can attach this fee on. So now if Tesla does its AI program and sets up a thing there and they're selling their Optimus Prime robots from that factory, they can now charge an amenity recreation fee.
That's kind of goofy. I mean, I get what you're saying, and that to me, I mean, sure, we need the job done, but it's, was it even done with a competitive process? I'm aware that many of these funding decisions, a big problem in the government is that sometimes it falls to one person to make the decision whether to do competing bids, and one person can decide not to for straight interests or for crooked reasons. It's happened all throughout California that city managers don't, and they have rules to do it. Anyway, that's one thing I would look into. I'm just very sore. I know that the military wastes a lot of money with these government procurement deals, and it's easy to get a good deal with the government sometimes.
Right. And remember, the other part that I put in there was other stakeholders, which that also opens the door to basically any business coming in there if they're a stakeholder in it. So now if they start, if they get a pass and they pay their entry fee in that aspect to be able to get onto the land to do it, now they can also bring, because they're a stakeholder, they can now bring their business on there. And that's where people like, you mentioned Dollar General can actually open up and be a part of this. This allows Walmart to come in. This allows other corporate entities to come in. They don't even have to be part of the technology or the spatial or any of that. So the doorway opens up. These little loopholes in the wording is so important. And if I were to spend like 5 or 6 days on this bill, going over each line and just breaking it down, I could tear it apart even more. And that's what nobody does anymore. Nobody goes in and tears these bills down. Sandy, you were getting ready to jump in on something. Go ahead.
Yeah, a reason on this bill, not what's behind it, that I would red flag it is the bill's not honest. It does.
Right.
The title does not cover half or more of what it wants to do. And I noticed that's reinforced by the committees. The committees have been through are like outdoor recreation committees. It needs to go through other, business committees and appropriate committees. So,
Economic and Commerce.
I believe it deserves to die.
Yes, Economic and Commerce committees. It needs to go through Judiciary Committee. It needs to go through the Ways and Means Committee. And no, it's not going through that. So yeah, it's very underhanded. And this is why I don't tell you who wrote the bill to begin with. Is I want you to go in there with that open mind of, okay, which side is doing it? Which side is doing it? Jack, he thought for sure it was a Democrat, and he's a Democrat. Nick, you're a former Republican. You still thought it was a Democratic bill. Sandy, you also former Republican, right? And now a forwardist?
No, I'm not a former Republican.
What were you prior to forward?
Well, prior to forward, independent for decades. I was a Democratic household growing up. Yeah. Okay,
Democratic household growing up, and you thought it was Democrat. I had a couple people in the comments that thought it was Republican because they immediately went to the business side of it, thinking that big business. We come to find out here are the Republicans submitting a bill that appears Democratic and has property Republican undertones. Okay, because remember, Democrats are looked at as human rights before property rights, whereas Republicans are looked at as property rights before human rights. Okay, whether there's truth to that or not is a whole nother story. That's just how usually people look upon that, is that Republicans believe in, you have these property rights, you got the right to bear arms, you got this. They are more of the fiscal aspect of the two parties, whereas the Democrats, again, let's do things to help people, blah, blah, blah. That's the persona that most people have. And in presenting this bill, I knew everybody was going to say Democrat. And then towards the end, I knew you're going to be kind of like, and I kind of figured you guys would go bipartisan on it. And that, again, we do have a Democrat that is co-sponsoring it. If it picks up ground, I guarantee you there will be more Democrats to sign on to it and more Republicans, because they're going to both see the benefits of it for what they want for their party. And when they propagate it, that's how they'll propagate it. This is going to do this for the people on the Democrat side. and the Republicans are going to propagate it, this is what it's going to do for business. It's going to bring our economy more money. It's going to create jobs. And that's how they're going to propagate it.
And
You guys
the
agree with that?
incentives are not aligned. I think that's the issue, is that our politicians' incentives are not aligned. They have their own set of incentives. The Republicans passed it for their own reasons. I'm almost positive that he thought he could win a lot of points over with his Indian tribe constituents, and so that and then to go, I think it's so insidious to go so far as to try and disguise it as a supplement to the national park system, when really the meat of the bill is hidden, and it is a land bill. It has not, and that's what I think pricked my hair up about the digital passes. In what world does it take an act of Congress to do this kind of tiny administrative decision?
Yes.
And unfortunately, it sells. I mean, you guys know the Inflation Reduction Act didn't really touch inflation at all. It was a bunch of infrastructure bill, and the infrastructure bill did other things. They did get a lot of money for infrastructure. I feel like, I'm sure this is where that came from. But
my thinking is, in seeing this, how it is going on, it really is in bad taste. I personally hate big businesses, especially their practices and hurting small businesses and people who want to do new companies or have new ideas and processes. Having substantially more investments to big businesses over small businesses is really a slap in the face, not just to small businesses, but for smaller and more rural communities, when they themselves could profit off of this by having members of their own community develop these small businesses, and then having the tourist dollars come in to benefit their businesses, and by extension, other businesses and residents in the same community. And by having even more of these possibilities, by saying a blind, just generic, all other interested parties. And I'm really glad that you brought this up, Paul, because at first glance, I only thought that would have been interpreted to be strictly those relevant, but because of how that is formed, and because of how that could be interpreted to be literally anyone, that has a huge potential for abuse and for really to the detrimental of the community. And so I'm red flag. I don't think this is a good bill.
Okay. Now, before we take closing thoughts, I wanted to take everybody back to congress.gov. And if you on congress.gov, if you go over here to the legislation tab and you click on it, that's going to bring up. Okay. Hopefully it'll bring up. There we go. It's going to bring up the 118th Congress. And over here on the left, I have legislation clicked. You can go to committee reports, committee meetings, publications, congressional record, members, nominations, treaty documents, House communications, Senate communications. You can pick your Congress. And it starts out with the last bill that's up there, which is H.R. 5455. And from this, you can look at all of the bills that are being presented. If they're introduced, whether they've passed the House, the Senate, to the president, or if they've already become law. And I highly recommend that people go to this website and check out the legislation, educate yourselves. If you truly want to know what your representatives are doing for you, you can even click on your representative and find out what bills he or she has proposed and what bills that they've wrote, what they're sponsoring, what they're co-sponsoring. See what your representative is actually doing for you. Closing thoughts. Let's start with our guest, Sandy.
Well, thank you, Paul, for pointing out the holes in it, the ambiguity in it, the loopholes. So all of us the other three panelists were focused on what it was saying, not what it was leaving out. And that is the problem with our legislation. They are very clever people who put it together. I'd love to know who are the sponsors, not the legislative sponsors, but the industry sponsors, the lobbyists that are behind this. Unfortunately, that's not an easy thing to track. Initially, I wasn't comfortable with it because it was adding odd thing, disparate things together in one bill. That
Yep.
raised my suspicion, gave it a red flag, but you really drove home why it's a problem and that it really was a subterfuge. So thank you for that. And yeah, it's an example of what's a problem with our Congress.
Yes. Let's go to Nick.
All right. Well, I do got to say, you can go to congress.gov and look at those bills. I've done that a few times. But in order to really understand that, you're going to have to watch Who Wrote the Bill Thursday mornings at 10, because there's layers and layers to it. And I don't have the time to go through it in as much detail as you did, Paul. And I'm sure none of our listeners do. And it, again, all I knew coming into it is that legislators are really tricky that way, and that they've got perverse incentives often, and they're very good at making the two happen. And so to me it was the style in which they did it. It's not, obviously I want digital passes and I want funds to go to gateway communities. That was a very compelling argument they gave at the beginning. So sure, I get that part, but all I would have to do was strike that one line which says other relevant parties or other applicable parties, and I would be on board with it. They would have to strike that. And again, I would like to see them, instead of proposing a fix, writing a fix, I want them to propose a solution. I want them to write a bill or have a part in the bill which makes it so that they never have to spend their time on a decision like this again. It's so off in the weeds for Congress people to be focusing on.
Yes. And quite frankly, I'm sure if I actually sat there with you and broke this bill down line by line, you would find more that you'd want taken out. Again, this is the deceptive practices of our government and what they try to push off on the people and what they promote in trying to get a bill passed. And they try to convince you it's going to help one thing when they have these underlying things that they're trying to do behind the scenes. Again, the red herring effect. Jack, go ahead. Closing thoughts.
Even though this has been just 1 hour, this was a lot more informative than I originally anticipated it to be. I originally took this, and this is why I'm glad that this is the first episode, because there's going to be a lot more, and I'm really glad that this is giving me some guidance going forward, because I was taking this just on the surface level approach, and on the surface there were a lot of components that I did originally anticipate and appreciate. But then going through it and then really considering the minutia and how this could be subject to not just misuse, but also abuse by major companies and big corporations, that gives me great pause and substantial concern, not just for this bill, but also other legislation that's being proposed and being enacted on and voted on right now. And this is also why it's very critical for people to take a lot more of this approach to really consider how these things could be misused, because people are already really hesitant to look into laws and legislation right now, because there's a lot of apathy and a lot of, I don't know what this is. I don't know how this is going to go. Just whatever, I want to leave it alone. And for those people who do just look at it on the surface level, they could think, this is great because on the surface it says it's going to do yada, yada, yada. But then for people who are a lot more experienced, like you, Paul, and Sandy and Nick probably too, in going through this and breaking this down, and this is why I'm really glad to be a panelist here, this tells me that I need to do a lot more breaking down on my own to say, okay, does this clause have the potential to be just on the surface, or does it have the potential to be a lot more depth than originally anticipated? And so this has been really eye-opening me. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to next time.
Definitely, and thank you. And this is why I'm an independent. And I know, Nick, you represent a great party, the Forward Party, but this is also why I won't sign on to another party. I want to see the bills they write. I want to know what they truly stand for, because in my opinion, Republicans and Democrats don't stand for what they promote themselves to stand for. And this bill is just another example of that. Okay. And this is what I want to do on Who Wrote the Bill. I want to bring people from all sides. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I don't care what your political beliefs are. I want to bring you on here and I want to educate everybody in what's going on in our government, because I believe with this kind of education, people can make more informed decisions. So when you have somebody that's saying that they represent the left, the right, the forward, the green, the constitutional, the libertarian, whatever party it is they represent, and they're proposing stuff, you can look deeper into it and see who they really are, because we need people that represent us, the working people of this country. And trust me, 160 million people out of 340 million people work paycheck to paycheck. These are the people that are busting their asses to make America what it is. And they're the ones that should be represented first and foremost, in my opinion. Okay. In my opinion. And, excuse me. I don't think we're getting that representation. And I'm trying to do everything I can to bring people together to get better people elected and better people in office. We need more parties. We need more representation, and we need more honesty. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming to this. I'm looking forward to next week. Remember, be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way. Thank you, everybody.